All right, good morning, guys. Ooh, that's a little loud. Take me down just a little bit. All right, good morning, guys. Welcome to the team. I'm Pastor Brian, by the way. It's good to be back after being away for a little bit. And I have to say, several of you have gone out of your way to let me know that over the last 3 weeks, team's never been better. I appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. I do want to thank Pastor Sterling and Pastor Jeff for covering for me for 3 weeks. I think it's the longest I've ever missed team in a row, but it was for a good reason. My wife and I had a trip of a lifetime just to spend together, so that was great, but it is good to be home. We'll remind you to sign in on the little sign-in sheets. We use those to make sure the groups are all set. We're just about at the place now, 5 weeks in, to set all the table groups, and we can always add guys. New guys are always welcome, but make sure you sign in today. Leaders, get those over to the back table. If you haven't paid your $50 yet, that's just honor system. Take care of that whenever you get around to it. I do want to start something today. You've been asking, several of you. In fact, today someone asked, are we going to do the prayer notes again? And I hadn't sent that around yet because I didn't want the other guys to worry about it. But we have this little prayer note. I signed it, and we're going to start it over here. I just send it down, up and down the rows. See how far we get today. Just sign your name on it. My signature here shows you about how big to sign your name. We need to get a lot of signatures on here. Like 3 columns or 3 or 4 columns in the front, all the way on the back. We'll fill this with signatures from team guys. And then when we pray for someone together, we will give you the option of taking this note, putting their name on it, and sending it to them, giving it to them, make sure that they know they were prayed for. We've had tremendous stories coming back for how much it means to people. So I'm going to start this right down here. Just sign it as all throughout the morning, and then we'll see how far we get. And if we need to go next week too, we'll do that. So let's get started with the prayer note. All right. Our story for today. A cowboy named Bud was overseeing his herd in a remote mountainous pasture in Idaho when suddenly a brand new Lexus pulled up out of nowhere in a cloud of dust. The driver, dressed in an expensive Italian suit, silk tie, dark sunglasses, leaned out the window and said, "Hey, cowboy, if I tell you exactly how many cows and calves you have in your herd, will you give me a calf?" Bud, the cowboy, looks at the man, who's obviously a city slicker, then looks at his herd and calmly answers, "Sure, mister, why not?" The guy parks his Lexus, whips out his iPhone 7 Plus, pulls up a NASA app that connects him to a GPS satellite that zooms in on his exact location, sends him a high-resolution image of the cowboy's herd. Then he sends the photo to an image processing facility. Within seconds, he receives an email with an Excel spreadsheet, which he then prints out on the HP LaserJet printer in his car. He looks at the printout and smiles at the cowboy. "You have exactly 1,586 cows and calves." "Well, gall darn, you're right. I guess you can take one of my calves," says Bud. He watches as the guy in the suit picks out one of the animals and stuffs it into the trunk of his car. Then Bud says to the young man, "Hey, if I can tell you exactly what your business is, will you give me back my calf?" The man in the Lexus thinks about it for a second and says, "Okay, old-timer, why not?" "Okay," says the cowboy, "you're a congressman for the U.S. government." "Wow, that's exactly right," the career politician says, "but how did you guess that?" "No guessing required," said the cowboy. "You showed up here even though nobody called you. You want to get paid for an answer I already knew to a question I never asked. You used millions of dollars worth of equipment trying to show me how much smarter than me you are, and you don't know a thing about how working people make a living, or about cows for that matter. This here is a herd of sheep. Now give me back my dog." Our theme this year is a turning point, the spiritual decisions of a man's life. We're going through the Bible kind of from front to back, looking at characters of men, some of whom we're familiar with, some of whom we won't know very well, but all of whom face a turning point, some sort of spiritual turning point. We began with Adam right at the beginning, who was, as I called it, the man who did nothing. His turning point was actually doing nothing to protect his wife from the approach of the evil one. And Pastor Jeff looked at Cain, the man who gave in to his own pride and rage and killed his brother. We jumped over Noah, which is a huge story, and I'm actually going to be covering Noah in one of our sermons in our series this year at FBCG called The Story of God, and that'll be in a couple of weeks. And then Sterling looked at Abraham, this very difficult story about Abraham and his son Isaac and the absolute trust Abraham needed to have in the God who would provide. And then last week, Jeff looked at Joseph. We took that a little bit out of order. Joseph should have been after the one we look at today. I don't know why I put him in the wrong order, but I did. But Jeff covered Joseph, a man whose turning point came to him unexpectedly in the form of a temptress, a woman, and how Joseph refused that opportunity. Now today we look at one of the more fascinating characters of the Bible, a man named Jacob. I'm calling this session Cage Match, and you'll see why in just a moment. The clip we're going to look at today comes out of one of the great guy movies of all time, Cool Hand Luke, made back in the 60s with Paul Newman playing the key character. Now, if you've been a while since you've seen the movie, Paul Newman plays a character named Luke, who's a former veteran, a war hero, who's kind of turned into this rebellious young man. Excuse me. He gets sent to prison for a petty crime, and right away, once he gets to this minimum security prison, he gets in trouble with sort of the tough guy prisoner in camp. He talks back to him in the barracks one night, so the guy wants to fight him, to teach him a lesson. And so we're going to pick up the scene right after this fight starts between Luke and the tough guy in camp. So roll the clip.
Get some more. Finish him up, Drag.
Nice shot, Drag.
Stay away from him.
Still got a chance.
Why don't you just stay down, Luke? He's just gonna knock you down again, buddy.
Not your fault. He's just too big. So let him hit you in the nose and get some blood flowing.
Yeah.
Maybe the bosses will stop it before he kills you.
I don't want to frighten him.
Stay down, Luke.
That's the end of it. Come on.
Don't get up.
Stay down, Luke. He's gonna kill you.
Stay down.
Somebody ought to stop this thing. Stay down. You're beat.
You're gonna have to kill me.
the outcome of that scene, if you know the movie and the story, is that he gets the daylights whooped out of him in that boxing match, but by the next day he's the most respected man in camp. He becomes the leader of the whole prison gang through a defeat. And I call that the magnificent defeat, and that's sort of the theme we see in the story we look at today. Genesis chapter 32. Read this strange Old Testament story. Let me read it for you. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, that's a river. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It's because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Now Jacob is one of the great characters of the Old Testament. Throughout the Old Testament, God is called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Jacob's a key character here. Jacob is the son of Isaac, the one that Abraham was asked to sacrifice, but God provided the sacrifice. He's the grandson of Abraham. He's the father of Joseph, whose story we looked at part of last week. And in Jacob's story, we see sort of a foreshadowing, I believe, of the gospel. But Jacob's a key character, but he's a fascinating character because of the background of his life, which we'll cover as we go along here. But the first thing we have to know about Jacob's life is that Jacob was a man who did it his way. He was a man who did it his way. There's an old saying, there are 3 kinds of people in the world. Those who watch things happen, those who make things happen, and those who wonder what happened. Well, Jacob was a man throughout his life who made things happen. He was smart and wildly ambitious. In fact, in that way, he kind of reminds me, I almost hate to say this, but he kind of reminds me of our presidential candidates. And that he was wildly ambitious. He didn't care who he had to sort of run over and take advantage of to get what he wanted. And Jacob found a way to do it his way. In fact, Jacob also reminds me of me. And I think he should remind you a little bit of you. For example, let's just say my wife and I are driving somewhere, and this will happen more often than I'd like to admit. But, we've lived in this area, the Tri-Cities, for 30 years now. And you drive all the places you normally go, to church or school or to the post office or whatever. And somehow she and I have developed kind of our own favorite pathways to get to places. Because from where we live in Batavia, you can take several routes to get to Route 31 if you want to go south. You can pick several routes to get to Geneva if you want to go north. Excuse me. And I'll be driving in our van. She's sitting over there, and we're heading somewhere we always go. And as we head out, I get to a turning point coming out of our neighborhood. She'll say, "I usually go this way," or she'll say, "Well, where are you going?" "Well, we're going to Geneva." "Well, I usually go this way." And what happens inside me? You guys know what I'm talking about? I'm like, I like to go this way. And she has in her mind, she likes shortcuts. She likes to always find a better way, and I like to go the way I like to go. And so within seconds, I feel this thing inside me. What? I'm not allowed to drive my own van? I mean, I want to go my way. Sometimes I don't say it, but I feel it. See, we all like to do it our way. And Jacob is sort of the patron saint in the Bible of a man who does it his way. Excuse me, I have something in my throat. Jacob was the youngest of twin boys born to his mother and father. The firstborn son, as many of you know, his name was Esau. His name in Hebrew means hairy one or red one. He was a man's man. As he grew up, he was covered with red hair, a hairy guy. Okay, his name actually means that. Jacob is a word that means one who grasps because he was born holding on to his brother's heel. Born second, but holding on to his brother's heel. His name means one who grasps, or heel catcher, one who supplants. So when the twins were young men, maybe late teens, 20 or so, Jacob took advantage of his older brother. Esau was sort of a knucklehead. He was a hunter. Jacob tended to stay home. But Esau comes home from a hunting trip. He's so hungry that he wants some of the stew that Jacob has cooked up, because Jacob's a good cook. And Jacob basically says, what do you give me for it? And Esau just blurts out, I give you my birthright. Now, the birthright was a big deal in that culture. It meant the older son got the lion's share of his father's inheritance, like 2/3 of it. And there's two boys. He was going to get 2/3, Jacob 1/3. And Jacob goes, deal. Gives them the porridge for the birthright. So takes advantage of his brother's knuckleheadedness and gets the lion's share of the inheritance all over a bowl of stew. Later on, when their father Isaac is dying, can barely see, Jacob partners with his mother to trick his father into giving him the blessing, the patriarchal blessing that belongs to the oldest son. But he puts animal skins on his arms so he feels hairy like his brother. He puts clothing on so he smells like his brother, and his father doesn't see so well, and he tricks Isaac into giving him Esau's blessing. And in that day and time, in that culture, there was only one blessing that could be given. It could never be taken back, and it couldn't be given again. And Jacob gets it because he tricks his father. And so he basically rips off his brother twice, because he's smart and he's ambitious. See, when Jacob wanted something, he didn't stop to think what God might want. Oh, thank you. So don't keep coughing all over everybody. He never stopped to think, what does God want here? He didn't worry about who he had to run over in the process. When he wanted something, he took it, and he found a way to get whatever he wanted. To quote Frank Sinatra, Jacob did it his way. That is, until we get to this part of the biblical story. Because secondly, Jacob's day of reckoning is coming. After he rips off Esau, he knows Esau's angry because Esau vows to kill him. So Jacob has to leave home. He's gone for like 20 years or so, and he becomes rich and affluent with wives and cattle and property and all that while he's gone. And then after some time, he decides, a long story, many chapters, he decides he needs to go back to his homeland. But as he nears his homeland, he hears that Esau is heading out to greet him with 400 men. So what do you think Jacob is thinking that Esau is thinking? Right? Revenge. It's like that scene from the movie Tombstone. You remember the movie Tombstone? When Wyatt Earp's younger brother's been murdered by Curly Bill's gang, and Wyatt comes riding into town with his guns drawn, screaming, I'm coming and hell's coming with me. Remember this scene? That's what Jacob thinks Esau is up to. He's heading out with 400 men to kill Jacob and take his revenge on this brother who's taken all his birthright and taken his inheritance. And he's terrified. He knows he's wronged his brother twice, and he assumes revenge is coming. Notice what Jacob does. Verse 22. It says, that night, Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. That's a river. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So basically, it's telling us here that Jacob believes Esau's coming with 400 men, so he sends his entire family across the river first. He sends all of his possessions, all of his flocks ahead of him on the other side. What's he doing here? He's hoping to placate his brother, his angry, revenge-filled brother. He's hoping that Esau will find some stuff he likes, that he can take his flocks. He can even take his wives. Just don't kill me, Jacob says. So he's sacrificing his whole family, but he stays back to protect who? Numero uno. This is Jacob. He's a survivor. Then we come to the weirdest and most interesting part of the story. This is what I call the magnificent defeat. Part 3 today, the magnificent defeat, where we spend most of our time. Verse 24, so Jacob was left alone. He sent all of his family ahead. Esau's coming with 400 men. He knows revenge is on its way. Jacob is by himself this night before what he thinks is going to be certain death, or hopefully maybe the death of his family, not him. Jacob is left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Now, you guys know, I've played a lot of sports growing up, baseball, basketball, football, the big 3, and it may come as a shock to you, but I was never a wrestler growing up. How many of you guys are wrestlers? I came to fear wrestlers because they're a little bit crazy. I mean, who wants to do that, right? Who wants to do that? Get all close to another guy and grab and hold, and that little outfits you wear. What's up with that? Anyway, but I hated wrestling when it came up in gym class. I just didn't like it at all. But I went to college, and I was playing basketball in college, and was lifting weights and feeling pretty good about myself. And sometime in my freshman, sophomore year in college, I think it was my sophomore year, we're messing around one night in the dorm, and there was a guy on our floor named Kenny who had, I didn't know had wrestled some in high school. I knew he'd been on the football team a little bit, but I was bigger than him, probably weighed about the same. And we're messing around one night or something, and guys start wrestling around. They start wrestling around, and Kenny goes, "Come on, let's go." And he called me by my nickname, Roro. "Come on, man, let's go, let's wrestle." And I thought, well, I'm as big as he is, bigger than him. I've been lifting weights. I'm a college athlete now. And what harm could it be? Worst decision I ever made. That guy twisted me, and he just abused me. And probably was assault in some way. Abused me. I had rug burns in parts of my body for weeks that I couldn't get rid of because he had me twisted up. Wrestlers are dangerous. They knew what to do. He knew how to wrestle. Okay, this is a wrestling match. Most scholars understand this stranger who jumps on Jacob during the night to be a mysterious appearance of God himself. Some believe it to be a pre-incarnate version of Christ. Some call it an angel. I just say it's God incognito who comes to meet Jacob and wrestle with him at this turning point in his life. Verse 25. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched or dislocated as he wrestled with the man. Now this is very interesting. It says the man, the stranger, could not overpower him, but then all it took was a touch to dislocate his hip. That gives us the first clue who the stranger is, right? If it just takes a touch to dislocate his hip, it tells us he could have done that anytime he wanted. Okay, he had the power to overpower Jacob, but he didn't overpower him on purpose for a certain reason. It's as if the stranger, God, is testing Jacob. He wants to see how hard Jacob will fight. Jacob, in his desperate struggle to survive this particular wrestling match, refuses to give up, refuses to give in, fights tooth and nail all the way through the night, it says. And when God, the stranger, sees that Jacob won't surrender, he just ends the match by touching his hip. As if to say, I can do this anytime I want. I'm stronger than you are. I'm more powerful than you are. I can do this anytime I want. And the match ends. But notice, Jacob still won't give up. Verse 26, then the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. You're done. I dislocated your hip. Let me go. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Now this is typical Jacob. He wants something out of this match. He wants to take something out of it. He needs something. But at the deeper level, there's something going on here. What does he want? He wants blessing. Jacob is craving after blessing. It's what he wanted from his father. It's what he tricked Esau and his father into getting from his father. He wants it from this stranger now because he senses the strength of this stranger. But for the first time in his life, Jacob can't get it on his own. He can't get what he wants on his own. He has to ask the stranger for it. Verse 27, then the man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Now this is the key to the whole story, because here God identifies himself. This is the first time we know who the stranger is, because you have struggled with God and have overcome. And plus, we see God doing something that only God can do. What does he do? He gives Jacob a new name. And whenever you see that happen in Scripture, you see a transformative process. You see God changing a man's identity. And it happens often. A new name means new identity. He gives Jacob a new name, Israel. And by changing his name, he changes his identity. And in changing his identity, he changes his purpose. No longer will you live for yourself, Jacob. No longer will you do it your way for yourself. You will lead my way, and you will lead others. You will live for others. Verse 29, Jacob said, please tell me your name. Notice, Jacob doesn't know yet who it is he's dealing with. He doesn't know clearly. Tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. So it tells me Jacob doesn't even know the God who's wrestling with him. Jacob has lived his whole life without knowing and wrestling with the God who created him. But God reveals himself to Jacob. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." So, Jacob's turning point comes when he wrestles in the night with God himself. More accurately, it comes when God chooses to wrestle with him. Jacob's turning point is when he loses the wrestling match. Jacob's turning point is when he finally surrenders. And here it is that we see shadows of the gospel. Now, the gospel in the Bible is not what we can achieve in and through ourselves. The gospel is that which is done for us. The gospel is not religion. All right? If you're here today and you believe that the gospel is, okay, if I can just become a better person, God will love me and accept me, that's not the gospel. The gospel is not religion. We tend to live by religion. I read something the other day that said the default mode of every human being is religion. If I do good enough, I'll be rewarded. That's not the gospel. The gospel is backwards. And we see it here in Jacob's life. Jacob has done nothing to deserve the blessing of God. In fact, he's done a lot to deserve the punishment of God. He's done nothing to deserve the blessing of God, but God chooses to wrestle with him. God chooses to bless him. God gives him what he cannot give himself. And so from front to back, the Bible is the story arc of the gospel. We see it here in Jacob's life. The gospel is what God gives us out of his holiness and love. It's what Jesus in the New Testament accomplishes for us. That is, new identity. Jesus said it's like being born again. New heart, which comes through the forgiveness of sin. New purpose, living not for ourselves, but for his purpose. New destiny, which we know is eternal life in the presence of God, the God who created us. But God, the gospel, requires a surrender. A surrender. But we're a little like Jacob. We like to do it our way. We don't like to surrender. I like to drive my pathway to where I'm going. I don't like to go somebody else's way. I don't like to acknowledge that God is bigger and stronger than me. I like to think I'm the strongest one in the match. We don't like to ask for his help. We don't like to surrender. But, and here's the story of Jacob. When we wrestle with God, God always wants to wrestle with us, but we need to know when we wrestle with him, he wins. God always wants to win. And the only way to have a genuine relationship with God is to surrender. That's the only way. As long as we insist on being the stronger in the relationship, as long as we insist on our way, we can't have a genuine relationship with God. As long as we insist on saving ourselves, as long as we insist on blessing ourselves, as long as we insist on our way, we can't have a relationship with God. But when we are willing to wrestle with him, when we're willing to feel his weight, his strength, when we surrender, then he blesses us. When I realize I cannot get blessing on my own, when I realize I cannot forgive my own sin, when I realize I can't earn my way into heaven, when I realize I have to say, I need you to do that for me, I need you to bless me, then God blesses our surrender. So the story of Jacob is the story of every man. In fact, it's the story almost of every turning point we face. Learning to wrestle with the God who always wants to wrestle with us. He's personal, he's powerful, and the blessing comes through surrender. Here's a couple questions to deal with around your table. I only have two. You can take them any direction you want. First, has there been a time in your life, by time I don't mean moment, I mean sort of era. Has there been a time or period of your life when you did it your way? When you were Jacob, when you insisted on doing it your way? Talk about that. Maybe you're in that time right now. Maybe it was recently. Maybe it was when you were a younger man. Secondly, do you have a personal story of wrestling with God? Now, this can go a lot of directions. It could be when you came face to face with him for the first time and realized what he demanded from you, when you realized what salvation meant, when you realized what sin was, when you realized his love for you. Do you have a personal story about wrestling with God? Maybe it was a significant decision. Maybe it's a job choice. Maybe it was something else in your life. But do you have a personal wrestling with God story? Maybe you aren't sure. Maybe looking back, you'll realize maybe you wrestled with him without knowing it. Do you have a personal wrestling with God story? So get some coffee, get a donut.